The quiet elegance of the Grand Royal Hotel's lobby belied the storm brewing within its polished marble walls. As the chandeliers cast a warm glow over plush sofas and gleaming countertops, an encounter was unfolding that would soon shatter the carefully cultivated atmosphere of refinement. Amara Johnson strode confidently across the lobby, her designer heels clicking softly on the floor. At 35, she exuded an aura of success, from her impeccably tailored suit to the quiet authority in her eyes. As an accomplished entrepreneur and hotelier, Amara was used to commanding respect wherever she went. But today, she was about to face a situation that would test her poise and challenge her very identity. The trouble began when Amara paused to examine a striking piece of artwork adorning the wall near the elevators. Lost in thought as she studied the vibrant canvas, she didn't notice the furtive glances and whispered conversations erupting among the staff nearby. "Did you see her eyeing that painting?" muttered Tyler, a newly hired bellhop, to his colleague. "Looks pretty suspicious if you ask me." Jessica, a front desk agent, frowned as she observed Amara from across the lobby. "I don't recognize her as a guest. Maybe we should alert security, just to be safe." Little did they know, the woman they were scrutinizing was not only a guest, but the very owner of the establishment they were so zealously attempting to protect. As Amara turned away from the artwork, she found herself suddenly confronted by two stern-faced security guards flanking a visibly nervous hotel manager. "Excuse me, ma'am," the manager began, his voice strained. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. There have been some concerns raised about your presence here." Amara's brow furrowed in confusion. "I beg your pardon?" she replied, her tone sharp with disbelief. "What exactly are you implying?" The manager shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her piercing gaze. "We've received reports of suspicious behavior, and we take the safety of our guests very seriously. If you could just accompany us to the office to clear things up." As the reality of the situation dawned on her, Amara felt a familiar knot form in the pit of her stomach. It was a sensation she'd experienced far too many times before, the sickening realization that once again, her skin color had led others to make false and hurtful assumptions about her character. "This is absurd," Amara stated, her voice low but firm. "I demand to know exactly what I'm being accused of." One of the security guards stepped forward, his hand hovering near the radio at his belt. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe you may be attempting to steal valuable items from the hotel. Now, if you'll just come quietly." Amara's laugh, sharp and humorless, cut through the tension like a knife. "Steal? From my own hotel? Oh, this is rich." The confusion on the faces of the staff was almost comical, had the situation not been so infuriating. Amara reached into her bag, pulled out her identification, and held it up for all to see. "I am Amara Johnson, the owner and CEO of Royal Hospitality Group. This hotel, and every painting, vase, and thread of carpet in it, belongs to me." The silence that followed was deafening. The manager's face drained of color as the implications of their mistake began to sink in. Nearby guests who had been pretending not to eavesdrop now openly stared, their expressions a mix of shock and second-hand embarrassment. I don't understand," the manager stammered. "We weren't informed of any visit from the owner today. Surely there's been some mistake?" Amara's eyes flashed dangerously. "Oh, there's been a mistake, all right, but not on my part. I'd like to know exactly who reported this suspicious behavior and what evidence they have beyond the color of my skin." As the gravity of the situation settled over the lobby like a heavy fog, Amara found herself at a crossroads. Part of her wanted to unleash years of pent-up frustration and righteous anger on these misguided employees. Another part recognized this as a painful but necessary opportunity, a chance to address the insidious prejudice that still lurked beneath the surface of even the most seemingly progressive establishments. Taking a deep breath, Amara straightened her shoulders and addressed the growing crowd of onlookers. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is unfortunately not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a much larger problem that persists in our society, one that I've dedicated my career to combating." Murmurs rippled through the assembled group as guests and staff alike shifted uncomfortably. Amara continued, her voice steady and clear. "I built this hotel chain from the ground up, facing countless obstacles and prejudices along the way. And yet, Even now, at the pinnacle of my success, I can't even admire the artwork in my own establishment without being labeled a criminal. The manager, still visibly shaken, attempted to interject. Ms. Johnson, please, if we could discuss this privately. Amara held up a hand, silencing him. No, this needs to be addressed openly and honestly. What happened here today is unacceptable, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity for growth, for learning, and for change. As she spoke, Amara could see the impact of her words reflected in the faces around her. Some looked ashamed, others defensive, but all were listening intently. She knew that this moment had the potential to spark real transformation, not just within the walls of this hotel, but perhaps even beyond. I'm not interested in punishment or retribution, Amara declared, her gaze sweeping across the lobby. What I want is understanding. I want each and every person here to take a hard look at their own biases and assumptions. Because until we do that, until we confront the ugly truth of prejudice head-on, incidents like this will continue to happen. The tension in the air was palpable as Amara's words hung over the crowd. In that charged moment, it was clear that this story was far from over. The true test would come in the hours and days to follow, in how the hotel staff, guests, and management chose to respond to this wake-up call. As Amara prepared to lead her impromptu audience on a journey of self-reflection and uncomfortable truths, one question loomed large in everyone's minds. Could this mortifying mistake become the catalyst for genuine change, or would it be yet another instance of injustice swept under the rug? The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge deeply ingrained prejudices and force everyone involved to examine their own role in perpetuating harmful stereotypes. As Amara took a deep breath, ready to guide her listeners through this difficult but necessary conversation, the future of the Grand Royale, and perhaps the hospitality industry as a whole, hung in the balance. Amara's gaze swept across the lobby, taking in the mix of emotions etched on every face. She knew this moment could either fracture her carefully built empire or become the cornerstone of real, lasting change. With a deep breath, she decided to seize the opportunity. Let's move this conversation somewhere more comfortable, Amara announced, her voice carrying a hint of steel beneath its calm exterior. I think it's time we all had a frank discussion about what just happened here. As if on cue, the hotel staff sprang into action, the training kicking in despite their obvious discomfort. Within minutes, one of the hotel's lavish conference rooms had been prepared. Guests and employees alike filed in, an air of nervous anticipation hanging over the group. Amara took her place at the head of the long mahogany table, her presence commanding even in this tense atmosphere. The accused staff members, Tyler the bellhop, Jessica from the front desk, and the security team, sat clustered together, their faces a mix of shame and apprehension. First, Amara began, her tone measured. I want to hear from each of you involved in this incident. I'm not looking for excuses or apologies just yet. I want to understand your thought process. What led you to make the assumptions you did? A heavy silence fell over the room. Tyler, the young bellhop who had first raised suspicions, cleared his throat nervously. I guess I just thought it was odd. Someone studying the artwork so intently, you know? We've had issues with theft before, and I was told to stay vigilant. Amara nodded, her expression unreadable. And at what point did my race factor into your suspicions? Tyler's face flushed red. I didn't. I wasn't trying to. It's okay, Amara interrupted, her voice softening slightly. I'm not here to attack you, but we need to be honest if we're going to address this properly. Did the fact that I'm a black woman influence your perception of the situation? The young man's shoulders slumped. Maybe. Yeah, I think it did. I didn't even realize it at the time, but looking back, I'm so sorry. Jessica, the front desk agent, spoke up next. We're trained to watch for certain behaviors, certain patterns, but I see now how easily that can become profiling. I made assumptions based on appearance, and that's not okay. As the discussion continued, Amara guided the conversation skillfully, encouraging honesty while maintaining a respectful atmosphere. She shared her own experiences, painting a vivid picture of the challenges she'd faced as a black woman in the business world. When I started out, Amara recounted, her eyes distant with memory, I couldn't even get a loan to open my first small bed and breakfast. Banks took one look at me and decided I wasn't a good risk. I had to work twice as hard, be twice as prepared, just to get a fraction of the opportunities my white colleagues received. The room hung on her every word, many hearing for the first time the reality of systemic racism from someone who had lived it. Amara continued, her voice gaining strength. But I persevered. I built this company from nothing, expanding from that single B&B to this international chain. And yet, even now, at the height of my success, I'm not immune to the same prejudices I faced at the beginning. As Amara spoke, a shift began to occur in the room. The initial defensiveness of some staff members gave way to genuine reflection. Guests who had initially been mere spectators began to engage, sharing their own stories and perspectives. One elderly white couple, longtime patrons of the hotel, approached Amara with tears in their eyes. "We had no idea," the woman said, her voice quavering. "We've always loved staying here, but we never stopped to think about the challenges you must have faced to create all this." The conversation flowed, touching on topics of unconscious bias, systemic racism, and the importance of diversity in the workplace. Amara deftly steered the discussion, ensuring it remained constructive rather than accusatory. As the hours passed, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The initial tension gave way to a sense of shared purpose. Ideas for change started to emerge, suggestions for improved training, diversifying hiring practices, and creating channels for ongoing dialogue. But even as progress was made, Amara knew the journey was far from over. The real test would come in the days and weeks to follow, when the emotional impact of this day had faded. Would the commitments made in this room translate into real, lasting change? As the meeting drew to a close, Amara stood once more, her presence commanding attention. "What happened today was unacceptable," she stated firmly. "But our response to it will define us. This isn't about punishment or public shaming. It's about growth, education, and becoming better than we were yesterday." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I'm challenging each of you, staff, guests, everyone, to take what we discussed here and apply it in your daily lives. Question your assumptions. Speak up when you witness injustice. Be the change we need to see in this world." As the group began to disperse, there was a palpable sense of both exhaustion and hope in the air. Many approached Amara personally, offering heartfelt apologies and expressing their commitment to do better. Yet even as she accepted their words graciously, Amara couldn't help but feel a familiar weariness settling over her. How many times had she been in this position? How many well-meaning promises had she heard, only to see things slide back to the status quo once the moment passed? Later that evening, as Amara sat alone in her penthouse suite, she found herself at a crossroads. The events of the day had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Part of her wanted to write the whole thing off as an isolated incident, to move on and focus on running her business. But she knew that doing so would be a betrayal of everything she stood for. As she gazed out over the city lights, Amara's mind raced with possibilities. Could she use this incident as a catalyst for broader change within the hospitality industry? Should she go public with her story, risking backlash but potentially inspiring others to speak out? The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Whatever choice she made would have far-reaching consequences, not just for her company, but for countless others who faced similar discrimination every day. As dawn broke over the horizon, Amara made her decision. She reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. The call she was about to make would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge the status quo and force a long-overdue reckoning within the industry she had worked so hard to conquer. But as she dialed the number, one question lingered in her mind. Was the world truly ready for the change she was about to demand? The sun had barely risen when Amara's phone call set her plan into motion. She contacted Gabrielle Chen, a respected journalist known for her hard-hitting exposés on corporate culture. "I have a story for you," Amara said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "It's time we shed some light on the dark corners of the hospitality industry." As news of the incident at the Grand Royal began to spread, reactions varied wildly. Some praised Amara for her grace under pressure and commitment to change. Others questioned her motives, wondering if this was all an elaborate publicity stunt. Social media exploded with hashtags like #HotelGate and #AmaraStrong, turning a personal encounter into a national conversation. Meanwhile, within the walls of the Grand Royal, the aftermath of that fateful day was still unfolding. Tyler, The young bellhop whose suspicions had sparked the incident found himself grappling with guilt and uncertainty. He'd always prided himself on being open-minded, but now he was forced to confront his own hidden biases. One afternoon, as Tyler was collecting luggage from a guest's car, he overheard a conversation that made him freeze. Two middle-aged men in business suits were chatting as they walked into the hotel. "Can you believe this whole mess?" one man scoffed. "Back in my day, we didn't have to worry about every little thing we said or did. Now you can't even protect your own business without being called a racist." Tyler felt his face grow hot with a mix of shame and anger. He wanted to speak up, to challenge their outdated views, but fear held him back. What if he lost his job? What if he made things worse? As the men disappeared into the lobby, Tyler was left with a gnawing feeling that his silence made him complicit. Across town, Jessica, the front desk agent who had also been involved in the incident, was facing her own crisis. Her family had always been supportive of her career in hospitality, but now they were urging her to distance herself from the controversy. "Just find another job, sweetheart," her mother pleaded over dinner. "You don't want to be associated with all this drama. It could hurt your future prospects." Jessica pushed her food around her plate, conflicted. "But Mom, don't you see? This is exactly why I need to stay. If all the people who want to make things better leave, how will anything ever change?" The conversation ended in a stalemate, with Jessica more determined than ever to be part of the solution, even as uncertainty gnawed at her resolve. Back at the Grand Royale, Amara was working tirelessly to implement the changes she had promised. New training programs were being developed, hiring practices were under review, and a diversity task force was formed. But progress was slow, and resistance came from unexpected places. Some longtime employees grumbled about special treatment and reverse discrimination. Others paid lip service to the new initiatives while clinging to old habits behind closed doors. Amara found herself constantly putting out fires, trying to balance progress with the practical realities of running a business. One particularly tense meeting with the board of directors left Amara feeling drained. Ms. Johnson drawled Richard Hartley, a silver-haired investor who'd been with the company since its early days. "While we appreciate your enthusiasm, we must consider the bottom line. All this negative publicity is affecting our bookings. Perhaps it's time to move on and focus on what we do best, providing excellent service." Amara felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest. "And who exactly are we providing that service to, Mr. Hartley? Only guests who look a certain way. Only those who fit a narrow definition of acceptable. Because I can assure you, that's not a sustainable business model in today's world." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Amara knew she was walking a fine line between pushing for change and alienating the very people she needed on her side, but she refused to back down, not when she'd come this far. As the weeks passed, the story continued to evolve. Gabrielle Chen's article hit the newsstands, painting a vivid picture of Amara's experience and the larger issues it represented. The piece sparked a fierce debate within the industry, with other hotels and resorts scrambling to examine their own practices. Amara found herself thrust into the spotlight as a reluctant spokesperson for change. She appeared on talk shows, gave interviews, and spoke at conferences. While part of her relished the opportunity to make a difference on a larger scale, another part longed for the relative simplicity of running her hotels. One evening, as Amara was preparing for yet another TV appearance, she received an unexpected visitor. Marcus, the security guard who had confronted her that fateful day, stood nervously in the doorway of her office. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I needed to talk to you. To apologize, yes, but also, I think I have some insights that might help. Things I've seen and heard over the years that could make a real difference in how we approach security and guest relations." Amara studied the man before her, seeing not just the uniform but the person wearing it. Someone who, like her, was trying to navigate a complex world with an imperfect set of tools. She gestured for him to take a seat. As Marcus began to share his experiences, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this, she thought, was how real change began, not with grand gestures and public declarations, but with quiet conversations and a willingness to listen and learn. The path ahead was still uncertain. The industry was in turmoil, her board was restless, and public opinion remained divided. But as Amara listened to Marcus, She knew one thing for sure: there was no going back. The comfortable silence that had allowed discrimination to flourish in the shadows had been shattered, and in its place was a chance for something better. As the city lights twinkled outside her office window, Amara allowed herself a small smile. The real work was just beginning, and she was ready for the challenge. The question now was, how far would she have to go to see her vision of true equality become a reality? And what unexpected allies or obstacles would she encounter along the way? As weeks turned into months, Amara's crusade for change in the hospitality industry gained momentum, but also faced mounting challenges. The Grand Royale had become ground zero for a cultural shift, with every policy change and new initiative scrutinized by the media and public alike. Amara's days were a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and crisis management. She barely slept in what felt like years, running on nothing but determination and countless cups of coffee. But despite her exhaustion, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was on the horizon. One crisp autumn morning, as Amara was reviewing the latest diversity reports in her office, her assistant burst in, face pale with worry. "Ms. Johnson, you need to see this," she said, handing over a tablet. Amara's heart sank as she read the headline. Grand Royale accused of tokenism and performative activism. The article, published by a respected industry watchdog, alleged that her efforts were nothing more than a PR stunt, citing anonymous sources within the company. As she scrolled through the damning accusations, Amara felt a mix of anger and despair. Had all her hard work been for nothing? Were there really people in her own organization working against her? Just as she was about to call an emergency meeting with her PR team, another crisis hit. Tyler, the young bellop who'd been at the center of the original incident, had given an unauthorized interview to a local news station. In it, he painted a picture of a company in chaos, with confused employees caught between old habits and new expectations. Amara watched the clip, her hands clenched into fists. Tyler's words weren't entirely untrue, but they painted an incomplete picture. She'd known the transition wouldn't be easy, but seeing the struggles laid bare for the world to see was a bitter pill to swallow. As if the day couldn't get any worse, Amara's phone buzzed with a message from Gabrielle Chen, the journalist who'd first broken her story. "Major exposure dropping tomorrow. Sources say Grand Royale's board planning to oust you. Call me ASAP." Amara felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She'd known some board members were unhappy, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. Her mind raced, trying to figure out who could have leaked such information and why. With hands that shook slightly, Amara began to dial numbers. She needed allies, and fast. As she waited for the first call to connect, she glanced out her office window at the bustling street below. How quickly things could change. Just months ago, she'd been on top of the world, and now. The next 48 hours were a blur of emergency meetings, frantic phone calls, and sleepless nights. Amara rallied every ally she had, from influential guests who'd supported her changes to employees who'd seen the positive impact firsthand. She prepared statements, gathered evidence of the progress they'd made, and steeled herself for the fight of her life. As the hour of the board meeting approached, tension in the Grand Royale reached a fever pitch. Employees whispered in corners, guests watched the unfolding drama with a mix of concern and curiosity, and reporters camped outside, hungry for any scrap of news. Amara stood in her office, adjusting her suit one last time before heading to face the board. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her job anymore. It was about everything she'd fought for, every person who put their trust in her vision of a more inclusive industry. Just then, a commotion outside caught her attention. Peering out the window, Amara's eyes widened in surprise. A crowd had gathered in front of the hotel. Employees, guests, and community members, all holding signs of support. "Stand with Amara," one read. "Real change takes time," declared another. The sight brought tears to Amara's eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. Now wasn't the time for emotion. She had a battle to fight. As Amara strode towards the boardroom, flanked by her most trusted advisors, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened in that room would define not just her future, but the future of the entire Grand Royale chain and perhaps the hospitality industry as a whole. She paused for just a moment outside the heavy oak doors, taking a deep breath. The murmur of voices from inside grew quiet as her arrival was announced. This was it. The moment of truth. With her head held high, Amara pushed open the doors and walked into the boardroom. The faces that turned to look at her were a mix of hostility, uncertainty, and, she hoped, a few allies. At the head of the table sat Richard Hartley, the silver-haired investor who'd been her most vocal critic. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice cold. "So glad you could join us. I believe we have some rather urgent matters to discuss regarding the future of this company." Amara met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Indeed we do, Mr. Hartley," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "I'm looking forward to it." As she took her seat, Amara could feel the weight of history on her shoulders. Whatever happened next would send ripples far beyond these walls. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of her vision for a more equitable and inclusive hospitality industry. Richard Hartley's voice cut through the tension-filled boardroom like a knife. "Before we begin, I believe we have a special guest who'd like to address the board." He gestured towards the door, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Amara's breath caught in her throat as the door swung open. In walked Jessica, the front desk agent who had been involved in the original incident. Amara's mind raced. What was Jessica doing here? Had she turned against her? Jessica stood nervously at the end of the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," she began, her voice quavering slightly. "I've been an employee at the Grand Royale for 5 years now, and I've seen a lot of changes, especially in recent months." Amara braced herself, unsure of where this testimony was headed. Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger. "At first, I was scared of change, scared of admitting my own biases. But working under Ms. Johnson's new initiatives has opened my eyes." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. This clearly wasn't the testimony Richard Hartley had been expecting. Jessica pressed on, her eyes bright with conviction. "I've watched our staff become more diverse, more understanding. I've seen guests from all walks of life feel truly welcome for the first time. Yes, it's been challenging, but it's also been incredibly rewarding." Just as hope began to bloom in Amara's chest, the boardroom door burst open again. A man in a sharp suit strode in, his presence immediately commanding attention. Amara recognized him instantly. Jack Morrison, CEO of their biggest competitor, Luxury Lodges International. "Sorry to interrupt," Jack said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I believe I have something that might interest this board." He placed a sleek folder on the table. "Inside, you'll find a very generous offer to buy out the Grand Royale chain." The room erupted in chaos. Board members topped over each other, some expressing outrage, others intrigue. Amara sat stunned, her mind whirling. This had to be a nightmare. Richard Hartley's voice rose above the din. "Order, please. Mr. Morrison, while we appreciate your unexpected offer, this is hardly the time or place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place," Jack interrupted smoothly. "Your company is in turmoil. Your reputation is taking hit after hit. I'm offering you a way out, a very profitable way out, I might add." Amara found her voice at last. "This is absurd," she said, standing up. "We are not for sale, especially not to a company known for its regressive policies and lack of diversity." Jack turned to her, his smile cold. "Ms. Johnson, always the idealist. But let's be real. Your little social experiment is costing this company millions. How long before the shareholders decide enough is enough?" The room fell silent, all eyes darting between Amara and Jack. The tension was palpable, two titans of the industry locked in a battle of wills. Suddenly, another voice piped up. It was Marcus, the security guard, who had been standing quietly in the corner. "If I may," he said, stepping forward, "there's something you all need to see." Marcus pulled out his phone and pulled up a video. As he cast it to the room's large screen, Amara recognized the lobby of the Grand Royale. The timestamp showed it was from just an hour ago. The video showed a diverse group of guests checking in, laughing and chatting with equally diverse staff members. The warmth and genuine connection were palpable, even through the screen. Then the camera panned to a wall where a large framed article hung. It was Gabrielle Chen's piece about Amara and the changes at the Grand Royale. A guest in the video pointed to the article, speaking to his companion. The audio was clear. This is why we chose this hotel. They're really walking the walk when it comes to inclusivity. Makes you feel good about where you're spending your money, you know? As the video ended, Marcus spoke up again. This isn't just a one-off. We've been seeing more and more guests like this. People who are choosing us specifically because of the changes Ms. Johnson has implemented. The boardroom was silent as the implications sank in. Amara's heart raced. Could this be the turning point they needed? Richard Hartley cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Well, this is unexpected. Perhaps we've been hasty in our judgments, but the fact remains we have a very real offer on the table. He nodded toward Jack Morrison, who was looking less smug by the second. Amara stood, her voice steady and clear. Members of the board, Mr. Morrison, I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the future of hospitality. Not just the future of the Grand Royale, but the entire industry. She paused, looking each person in the eye. What we decide here today will set the course for years to come. Will we choose profit over progress? Will we sell out our values for a quick payday? Or will we have the courage to stand by our convictions and lead the way into a more inclusive future? The room crackled with tension as Amara's words hung in the air. Board members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Jack Morrison's confident facade began to crack, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. Just then, Amara's phone buzzed. She glanced down to see a message from Gabrielle Chen. Breaking news about Luxury Lodges International. Call me ASAP. This changes everything. Amara looked up, a mix of determination and curiosity in her eyes. The next few moments would determine not just her fate, but the fate of everything she'd worked for. As she opened her mouth to speak, the room leaned in, waiting to hear what she would say next. Amara's fingers hovered over her phone, the weight of Gabrielle's message pressing on her mind. The boardroom hung in suspense, all eyes fixed on her. With a deep breath, she made a decision that would change everything. Before we go any further, Amara announced, her voice steady, I think we all need to hear some breaking news. She dialed Gabrielle's number and put the call on speaker. Gabrielle's voice filled the room, clear and urgent. Amara, I hope I'm not too late. We just uncovered a massive scandal at Luxury Lodges International. Systemic discrimination, cover-ups, even bribery of officials to look the other way. It's all about to hit the press. The boardroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Jack Morrison's face drained of color as Gabrielle continued. Their stocks are going to plummet. Any association with them right now would be disastrous. As the call ended, a heavy silence fell over the room. Amara stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces before her. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at a crossroads. Not just for the Grand Royale, but for the entire industry. We have a choice to make. She turned to Jack Morrison, who was now visibly sweating. Mr. Morrison, I think it's clear that your offer is off the table. But I have a counter-proposal for you. Confusion flickered across Jack's face as Amara continued. Instead of buying us out, why don't we work together? Let the Grand Royale lead the way in transforming Luxury Lodges International. We can help you clean house, implement real change, and set a new standard for the industry. The board members exchanged looks of surprise and intrigue. Richard Hartley leaned forward, a newfound respect in his eyes. Ms. Johnson, are you suggesting a partnership? Amara nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. More than that, I'm suggesting a revolution in hospitality. One where inclusivity isn't just a buzzword, the foundation of everything we do. She turned back to Jack, who seemed to be regaining his composure. Mr. Morrison, you came here thinking you could buy us out. Instead, I'm offering you a lifeline. A chance to turn this scandal into an opportunity for real, lasting change. The room held its breath as Jack considered her words. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. Ms. Johnson, I came here thinking I had all the answers. But clearly, I have a lot to learn. If you're willing to help us, to lead this change, I'm on board. A ripple of excitement ran through the room. Board members who had been skeptical of Amara's vision now looked at her with newfound admiration. Richard Hartley stood up, a smile breaking across his face. I think I speak for the entire board when I say, Amara, we owe you an apology, and our full support moving forward. As the reality of what had just transpired sank in, the atmosphere in the boardroom shifted from tension to celebration. Plans were already being made, ideas flowing freely as everyone realized the potential of this new partnership. Amara stood in the midst of it all, a sense of triumph washing over her. But as she looked around the room, she noticed Marcus, the security guard, slipping quietly out the door. Excusing herself, she followed him into the hallway. "Marcus," she called out softly. He turned, a mix of emotions playing across his face. "I couldn't have done this without you. Your video, your support. It made all the difference." Marcus smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I'm glad I could help, Ms. Johnson, but I think it's time for me to move on. I've learned so much here, and now I want to start my own security consulting firm, help other hotels implement the kind of changes we've made here." Amara felt a pang of sadness, but also immense pride. "Marcus, that's wonderful. And please, call me Amara. In fact, I have a feeling the new Grand Royal Luxury Lodges partnership might be in need of exactly that kind of consulting. What do you say we discuss a contract for your new firm?" Marcus's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with joy. "I'd be honored, Amara." As they shook hands, Amara felt the last piece of the puzzle fall into place. This wasn't just about changing one hotel, or even one company. It was about creating a ripple effect that would transform the entire industry. Returning to the boardroom, Amara was greeted by a standing ovation. As she looked around at the faces of her colleagues, her employees, and even her former adversaries, she knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, the future of hospitality looked bright, inclusive, and full of possibility. As the meeting adjourned and people began to file out, Amara's phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from Gabrielle. "Congrats on the partnership. But fair warning, I'll be watching to make sure you all follow through. The story's not over yet." Amara smiled, slipping her phone back into her pocket. No, the story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. And she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that every step forward was a step towards a more inclusive, understanding world. The Grand Royale had started as her dream, but now it was becoming a beacon of change for an entire industry. And that was a legacy Amara Johnson could be proud of. In the weeks that followed the groundbreaking boardroom meeting, the Grand Royale Hotel buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. The news of the partnership between Grand Royale and Luxury Lodges International spread like wildfire through the hospitality industry, sparking both excitement and skepticism. Amara found herself busier than ever, dividing her time between implementing changes at the Grand Royale and consulting with luxury lodges to help them navigate their own transformation. It was exhausting work, but every small victory felt like a step toward a greater goal. One sunny afternoon, as Amara walked through the Grand Royale lobby, she noticed a familiar face at the front desk. It was Tyler, the young bellhop whose actions had inadvertently set this whole journey in motion. He was engaged in animated conversation with a diverse group of guests, his body language open and welcoming. As the guests moved away, satisfied smiles on their faces, Amara approached Tyler. "That was impressive," she said warmly. "You've come a long way." Tyler's face lit up with a mix of pride and embarrassment. "Thanks, Ms. Johnson. I've been working hard on the training programs you implemented. It's opened my eyes to so much." Amara nodded, a sense of satisfaction washing over her. "We've all been learning, Tyler. That's what this is all about." As they chatted, Jessica, the front desk agent, joined them. "Ms. Johnson," she began, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "I wanted to thank you for everything. Standing up in that boardroom was terrifying, but it felt right. I never thought I'd have the courage to do something like that." Amara smiled, placing a hand on Jessica's shoulder. "You found your voice, Jessica, and in doing so, you helped save this company. Never underestimate the power of speaking your truth." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Jack Morrison, who had been working closely with Amara on the partnership. His demeanor had changed dramatically since that tense boardroom confrontation. Gone was the arrogant CEO, replaced by a man genuinely committed to change. "Amara," he called out, striding across the lobby. "I've just gotten off the phone with our PR team. The response to our joint initiative has been overwhelming. We're seeing a surge in bookings across both chains." Amara's eyes widened in surprise. "Already? That's faster than we anticipated." Jack nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Turns out, There's a huge market for hotels that prioritize inclusivity and social responsibility. Who knew? He chuckled, shaking his head in wonder. As they discussed the latest developments, Amara couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. The Grand Royale, once at the center of a discrimination scandal, was now leading the charge in transforming the hospitality industry. Later that evening, Amara found herself in her office, poring over the latest diversity reports. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. It was Richard Hartley, the board member who had once been her staunchest opponent. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, his tone softer than Amara had ever heard it. She gestured for him to enter, curious about what had brought him here. Richard settled into a chair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I owe you an apology, Amara," he began. "I was so focused on short-term profits that I couldn't see the bigger picture. You've shown all of us, that doing the right thing can also be good for business." Amara leaned back in her chair, studying the man before her. "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot coming from you. But I hope you understand that this isn't just about business. It's about creating a world where everyone feels valued and respected." Richard nodded sullenly. "I'm beginning to understand that, and I want you to know that you have my full support moving forward. In fact, I've been thinking about ways we can expand our initiatives beyond just our hotels." As Richard shared his ideas, Amara felt a surge of hope. This was the kind of change she had dreamed of, not just surface-level policies, but a fundamental shift in thinking that could ripple out into the wider world. The next morning, Amara arrived at the hotel to find a small crowd gathered in the lobby. At the center was Marcus, now dressed in a sharp suit that befitted his new role as a security consultant. "What's going on here?" Amara asked, approaching the group. Marcus turned, a proud smile on his face. "Just giving a demonstration of our new security protocols," he explained. "We're showing how we can maintain a safe environment while still being welcoming and respectful to all guests." Amara watched as Marcus walked the group through various scenarios, emphasizing communication, de-escalation, and cultural sensitivity. It was a far cry from the confrontational approach that had once been the norm. As the demonstration concluded, Amara noticed Gabrielle Chen among the onlookers, scribbling notes in her reporter's pad. Their eyes met, and Gabrielle gave a small nod of approval. Later, as Amara and Gabrielle sat down for an interview, the journalist's questions were as probing as ever. "You've made impressive strides," Gabrielle acknowledged, "but how do you respond to critics who say this is all just for show?" Amara took a moment to consider her response. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she began. "What we're doing here is laying the foundation for long-term, sustainable transformation. It's not always perfect, and we're learning as we go. But we're committed to this path, not because it's easy or because it makes for good PR, but because it's the right thing to do." Gabrielle nodded, jotting down notes. "And what would you say to other business leaders who are hesitant to follow your lead?" A determined glint appeared in Amara's eye. "I'd say that the world is changing, whether they like it or not. Businesses that don't adapt, that don't embrace diversity and inclusion, will be left behind. But more than that, I'd ask them to consider the impact they could have. We're not just running hotels, we're shaping the world our guests live in, one stay at a time." As the interview wrapped up, Amara felt a sense of closure. The story that had begun with a moment of prejudice and misunderstanding had blossomed into something far greater than she could have imagined. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Amara stood on the rooftop terrace of the Grand Royale. She looked out over the skyline, thinking about all the lives that had been touched by this journey, from the staff who had found their voices to the guests who now felt truly welcome. A gentle breeze carried the sounds of laughter and conversation from the hotel below. Amara closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. This was the sound of progress, of barriers being broken down, of a world slowly but surely becoming more understanding and inclusive. As she turned to head back inside, Amara's phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made her heart swell. "I stayed at your hotel last week. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel out of place or unwelcome. Thank you for creating a space where people like me can just be. You've gained a customer for life." Amara smiled, slipping the phone back into her pocket. This was why she had fought so hard, why she would continue to push for change. Because in the end, it wasn't about policies or profits, it was about people. As she walked through the halls of the Grand Royale, Amara felt a profound sense of pride and purpose. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But with every step, every small act of kindness and understanding, they were moving closer to the world she had always dreamed of. And as the Grand Royale settled into another busy night, its lobby filled with a diverse tapestry of guests and staff, Amara knew that they were writing a new chapter in the story of hospitality. A chapter where everyone, regardless of their background, could find a place to belong. It wasn't always easy, and there would always be challenges ahead. But as long as they stayed true to their values, the future looked brighter than ever.